He walked toward shore, and then the sea took him, as if the water itself decided he would not return. Michael Rockefeller was young, curious, and dangerously patient. A Harvard graduate, a collector of art, a man who chased fading cultures with the zeal of someone who feared nothing. In November 1961, he vanished from a remote stretch of New Guinea, and the empty space he left behind is filled with rumor ever since. Picture the scene: a raw wooden canoe, half broken, drifting in muddy water. The sky presses down, heavy and hot. Insects hum like a broken radio. The smell of sago and smoke hangs in the air. Night in Azimuth is a thick, listening dark, the kind that makes your skin feel watched. Michael loved this place. He loved its carvings, its ceremonies, the stubborn, complicated beauty of things that might disappear if someone didn't study them. 2 days before he vanished, his boat capsized. Michael and Renee Wassing clung to wreckage for hours, then days, under an endless sun. They were exhausted, salt raw, waiting for a rescue that was slow to come. When dawn came on November 19th, Michael said quietly, "I think I can make it." He lashed 2 jerry cans into a float, took a compass and a knife, and set off toward a shoreline that looked a long way away. Renee watched him go. He watched 3 dots on the horizon, 2 cans, and a head cutting through the waves. That was the last clear sighting. Michael never reached land. His canoe was found. His belongings were not. The search that followed was huge. Helicopters, ships, Dutch and Australian units combing mangroves and channels. His father, a powerful man, joined the effort. His twin sister came, too. People paddled every river they could find. They found nothing that could be proven. Officially, the simplest answer felt best. He drowned. The sea is a clean, certain thing. It explains absence with quiet finality. But whispers moved differently. Missionaries who lived among the Azimuth spoke a language of odd certainty. They reported locals saying a white man had reached shore, was pulled from the water, and was taken away. In some accounts, he was stabbed, killed, and his bones were distributed. These stories were told in private letters, in notes buried in colonial files, in conversations that ended in silence. To understand those stories, you must understand the Azimuth world. Their rituals are not random violence. Headhunting, in that culture, had rules and meaning. It balanced debts, blood for blood. In 1958, Dutch soldiers had killed several men from a nearby village. The wound that created ran deep, in a system built on obligation and spirit. An outsider's body could be interpreted as part of that ledger. That context changes how we see a single desperate swimmer. It turns tragedy into consequence, or revenge into ceremony. There were fragments, the kind of things that burn the mind but never prove a case. A patrolman later said he saw a skull with a hole in the temple. Missionaries wrote of shorts, glasses, and bones pass among men. A woman later said she remembered finding a bracelet. None of it was handed to courts. None of it sat on a lab table for modern testing. The items faded into rumor, or into dusty files that governments prefer to forget. The secrecy around these reports smells of politics. In 1961, the Dutch were losing grip on their colony. The world watched decolonization like a tournament. Then there was Michael's family, powerful, connected, a name that could ripple into headlines and embassies. Officials had reasons to keep certain things quiet. A story of cannibalism involving a wealthy American son is explosive in any era. So some papers simply stopped being public. Some men who wrote notes in journals never saw their notes read. Journalists and filmmakers came later, trying to stitch the pieces together. Tobias Schneebaum filmed villagers acting out scenes of discovery and killing. The performance had laughter at first, the nervous laughter of people telling a secret. Then it faded into silence when questions went deeper. Milt Mucklin, years after the event, traveled there and left convinced the simple drowning story didn't fit all the evidence. Carl Hoffman, decades later, spent months in those villages and returned with interviews that sounded oddly like the ones from the 60s. Repeated words, repeated names, a pattern that refuses to die. One detail haunts me. The warnings. Hoffman recorded a villager saying, "Don't tell this story to anyone. Don't speak outside this village. If you do, you will die." That is a chilling line because it mixes fear and belief. For the Asmit, silence can be a safeguard. Speaking certain truths can, in their cosmology, invite retribution. For outsiders, it feels like a barrier. For insiders, it is protection. Mary Rockefeller, Michael's twin, carried grief in a way that drained decades. She wrote about the strange intimacy of twins, a loss that is not just emotional, but anatomical, an absence that feels like a missing limb. She leaned toward the drowning theory. It is humane, tidy, forgiving. To believe in drowning is to imagine an accident, a cruel but natural end. To accept the other stories is to step into ugliness and history, into violence tied to colonial wounds. Maybe that is why some prefer the water explanation. It spares the living a harder truth. And yet, every so often, a new voice appears. An elder remembers a burnt belt. A fisherman finds a metal buckle. A camera reel surfaces. None of these have ever produced a body, the proof that would end all debate. Instead, each tiny scrap pushes a mystery wider, like a tide drawing back to reveal more mud and shadow. Now consider the politics again. What if files were quietly closed to avoid scandal? What if local testimony was never fully recorded because the powers that were feared the consequences of revealing it? The absence of prosecution doesn't equal absence of fact. It can mean evidence was ignored, misplaced, or deliberately suppressed. When institutions decide what to show, they shape the story we inherit. Here is the twist that shifts everything. The story that seems most dramatic, the idea that Michael was captured, killed, and consumed, is not purely a sensational rumor invented later for books. It matches reports recorded in 1961 by missionaries who lived there at the time. These were not tourists. They spoke the language. Their notes predate political spin, and they contain specific names, places, and fragments that line up with later accounts. In other words, the most explosive theory has roots in the earliest reports, not only in later retellings. That does not make it fact. It makes it impossible to ignore. So where does that leave us, now, decades later? With two stubborn possibilities: a man lost at sea, claimed by nature and forgetfulness, or a man taken by a ritual answer to an older violence, a piece of history that swallowed him and closed its mouth. Both answers carry weight. Both leave questions. What should we do with the questions? We can demand archives be opened, files be searched, DNA testing be done on any remaining fragments. We can listen to the Asmit with respect and to the missionaries' notes with caution. We can face the ugly overlaps of colonial violence and cultural survival. Or we can let this remain a riddle that sits by the river, whispering while the world moves on. One last moment. Imagine standing at the water's edge in that long-ago morning, watching a small figure stroke toward a distant shore, thinking, "I think I can make it." Would you swim? Would you wait? Would you try to carry the thing you loved across the dark? Knowing so little, the choices feel simple when we are safe at home. They feel different under a sun that burns and a sea that will not give anything back. So tell me, What do you believe happened to Michael Rockefeller? Was he claimed by the sea, or by something far older and more cruel? And if the answer lies where so many secrets sleep, are we ready to find it? Leave your thoughts below. And remember, some stories live in the mud and some live in the archives, but both keep their own counsel. This is one of those unsolved mysteries.